In the cath lab, the patient is awake on the table, flat on their back, looking at the ceiling tiles, while we work on their hearts. And as we work on the heart, there's a physiologic stress from the catheters and the balloon interrupting blood flow in the artery. And we realized, on a busy day, I'll be running in 5 different directions, and I've been cathing a long time. I think I have reasonable skills, but who do you want pushing catheters? And your mother, an experienced cardiologist who has a whole team coming after him, 2 pagers going off, grants due, or the same cardiologist to just stop for a minute before he walks in the cath lab and let all that go. We started doing that with a wonderful little prayer called the Physician's Prayer from Mother Teresa. No matter how busy the day, before I walked in the cath lab, we would stop and just read through this prayer. It wasn't fancy, but it divided the cath lab space from everything else in the day. How far reaches it to have everyone stop for 60 seconds once the patient's on the table, simply to remember how much trust that person is putting into our hands. 60 seconds a case.
I'm Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, Vice President for Research and Education at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Dr. Krucoff's experience typifies the difficult challenges that are altering the delivery of health care in America. On a daily basis, we hear about spiraling medical costs. We see increasing professional despair among physicians and other healthcare professionals. And we watch as millions of Americans live without health care coverage. But there's another side to the healthcare story, one we've been tracking at the Institute of Noetic Sciences for over 30 years. It's a story not of crisis, but of transformation, a transformation that may lead to dramatic changes in the art and practice of healing. In this program, we'll explore what some are calling a revolution that is causing us to rethink everything, from the nature of healing and curing to the role of doctor and patient. We'll talk with research scientists who have the courage to ask tough questions and the creativity to envision new models. We'll hear from committed physicians toiling on the front lines. We'll learn the stories of people pioneering new approaches to health and healing, week by week, day by day, and in some cases, 60 seconds at a time. One of the strongest critics of our healthcare system is Dr. Larry Dossey. We spoke with him recently about his perspective on the current situation in medicine.
The current state of health care is a mess in America. I think it's no revelation to anyone that American medicine is often seen as cold, remote, uncaring. Some people would say even inhumane. It's too costly and it's often too late. It's common knowledge among physicians that our profession is in deep trouble. And so we ruminate at length about how to rescue this. Most of the approaches to fixing American healthcare amount to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's just not helpful. We need to think broadly. We need to reconceptualize what we want to accomplish in American healthcare. And I think it's hopeful.
There are tremendous time constraints, financial constraints, and the folks who are having the hardest time are primary care physicians, pediatricians, family physicians, and internists. We're really treading water, just struggling to do a good job with our patients and have something left of ourselves at the end of the day when we go home for our lives.
Speaking to physicians about some of these things, they're certainly telling me in some of my research that in this way, managed care has really been a disaster in terms of the restrictions on time that they can spend. I mean, this has come out in my earlier comments about this hesitancy to adopt a kind of whole person perspective, a mind-body kind of approach. Many physicians are telling me that they would love to be able to adopt that approach, but they feel like they actually can't, given the kind of time constraints that they're under. And so sometimes just they're frustrated by that, but they feel like they want to address something and help in some way.
I get frustrated a lot. I think what I try to do is I take the time that I need when I have the patient right there. I feel like the bird in hand is important. You don't want to lose an opportunity. What it often does is it makes my day tight and late. I'm always behind. I set my watch 10 or 15 minutes ahead so that I can try to be somewhat near a schedule. And that's stressful. And I think it's taking its toll on me, trying to squeeze in what I really would like to do into a system that really doesn't want to let me do it that way.
Today, our healthcare system is characterized by two important trends. One trend is the growth of diagnostic technologies and powerful drugs that dominate the practice of medicine. The other trend is that health practitioners are now less likely than ever before to develop any meaningful connection with their patients. Some believe we've moved to a factory model of healthcare, where physicians are highly skilled workers on an assembly line, and patients are treated primarily as physical objects. The emphasis on being emotionally disconnected from patients often begins early in the physician's medical training. Tom Janisse, an MD and senior manager with Kaiser Permanente, remembers how, as a medical student doing rounds in the hospital, his instructors showed little sensitivity toward the patients.
So when they left, I stayed behind to be with the patient, to sort of help recover the patient from what I imagined was a shock from this onslaught of traditional medicine questions and distance. And after I finished talking to the patient and making sure the patient was okay, and then caught up with the group, I was summarily dismissed for having fallen out, for becoming too emotionally connected with the patient, and berated for that, and that I wouldn't ever really be a good doctor if I got so emotionally connected, and I had to stop doing that.
There's still an enormous emphasis on technology. There's still an enormous emphasis on having the newest cath lab system or the newest electronics. And unfortunately, what we've built into that is a great awareness of time management and coding, so that the whole environment is, from a patient side, a colder, brisker one, where you may go to some place because they have great technology, but you better keep a family member around if you want care. I think that we are now beginning just to see a shift in understanding that that's really not adequate. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just not enough. It's not the whole picture. The rest of the human being actually may matter.
$50 years ago, we didn't have as many tests to run. We didn't have as many drugs we could give. So what we had to rely on, I think, was our being, our presence. So my biggest concern with medicine right now is that we're moving too far to the side of technology and tests, and away from just the one-on-one interpersonal experience that I think is essential to the healing relationship.
Probably the thing that I've learned in the last few years that has been the most effective in keeping me sane is just getting in touch with my emotions. When I have a child die, cry, and cry as close to the time as I can. I just realized that denying the feelings that I'm having, whether it's joy in a delivery room where we all start clapping and laughing, or just breaking down and crumbling on the floor with a mother who's there because her child's dead, it's equally important to be able to let that emotion out and not hold it in.
In 1991, Dr. David Eisenberg of Harvard Medical School conducted groundbreaking research that revealed a radical shift in our society's approach to healing. Eisenberg discovered that 34% of Americans were using various alternative medical therapies, many times what was expected, and they were spending an estimated $10 billion a year out of their own pockets, a figure far beyond what anyone had predicted. Eisenberg also discovered that 72% of those surveyed had never discussed their alternative health practices with their doctors. Physicians were shocked to learn that many of their patients were creating their own healing regimens without asking for their advice or approval. Today, alternative therapies are moving into the mainstream. A significant number of American hospitals now offer a range of complementary and alternative medical practices, often referred to as CAM. Some doctors argue that these programs offer patients a confusing grab bag of traditional and alternative treatments with no intricately informed diagnosis or treatment plan. We discussed the emergence of CAM programs with Dr. Stanley Krippner of Saybrook Institute. His perspective comes from his experience, both as a researcher and as a patient who's had personal contact with the current medical system.
Now, in my own case, I had prostate cancer a few years ago, and I was very fortunate that it was diagnosed so quickly. And one option was just wait and see what happens. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. I went immediately to have radiation therapy. Let me tell you, some of my friends from the alternative medicine fields were horrified. They said that radiation is going to be worse than the disease. And they were shocked that I would allow this to happen. And I said, but at the same time, I am doing things with diet, I'm doing things with distant healing, I'm even doing things with homeopathic remedies, I'm doing things with visualization and prayer. I'm doing all of these complementary procedures at the same time.
You can actually begin to integrate these things and find really what are the features of these that actually should be kept and which of these features of these different healing systems maybe should be discarded because they represent old models that we've outgrown, literally, in terms of our understanding of science and how the world works. So that's going to be a process that's going to have to sort itself out as we learn more about these different approaches. But I'm not one that subscribes to the notion that we should just simply embrace them because they come from an ancient tradition and that has been practiced for 5,000 years.
I think that we really need an evidence-based program of diverse healing methodologies and systems. And I just really think that the term complementary and alternative medicine is a good one because some of these approaches are clearly an alternative to allopathic biomedicine, while others are complementary and can be used along with it. And the trick is to figure out when a really sick person should use the complementary medicine and when they should use the alternative medicine.
We know vastly more about the human body than we did just 50 years ago, but our ability to facilitate human healing remains as much an art as a science. How the body heals is such a complex process that no model, neither allopathic, nor alternative, nor indigenous, really has all the answers. And the answers these models do offer are often diametrically opposed. On the one side are alternative and indigenous healing systems such as acupuncture, homeopathy, and curanderistic medicine. All these alternative models share the belief that healing practices should focus on stimulating and supporting the body's natural efforts to restore a person to health. On the other hand is the allopathic model, the basis of Western medicine. This model is often aggressively interventionist. It uses powerful drugs and surgical procedures that attack diseases in ways that often ignore or can even damage the body's innate healing ability. The differences between the two models are clearly seen in how alternative therapies emphasize the healing of the patient, while modern medicine focuses on the curing of an illness. We asked Dr. Krippner to comment on these differences.
I think that healing and curing are actually quite different. Curing is much more typical of allopathic biomedicine or Western medicine, where you simply want to help the patient by getting rid of the symptoms. And therefore, you can use antibiotics, you can use surgery, you get rid of the symptoms, and the patients feel fine and go on their way and hopefully don't have a relapse. Now, healing is much more of a, shall we say, holistic process, because one is not only interested in getting relief from symptoms, but the healer is also interested in the intellectual, the emotional, the spiritual point of view, rather than just the physical.
It's wise to distinguish between healing and curing. Curing generally is just making a disease go away. Healing is much more profound in my judgment.
On a practical level, curing is what I got trained to do as a doctor, which is somebody comes in with a stated problem, and I do my best to help that problem go away or at least bother them less. Healing sometimes involves curing, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes we can cure at the expense of healing. And sometimes curing is exactly what's called for healing to occur.
When I was writing my dissertation with David Begay, we discussed to a great extent the concept of healing and curing. We did this with all kinds of words, but in particular with healing and curing. Healing we talked about as the overall concept of putting yourself back in balance with the natural forces. Curing would be when you would go to somebody for help with a particular symptom. We felt that curing was something that Western medicine was good at, but healing was something they were not good at, not as good.
Now, if a person dies during treatment, the doctor will say, well, the treatment was a failure. The patient died. However, the healer from another tradition might say, but this particular client of mine grew so much emotionally, grew so much spiritually, and had such a good death that the healing was successful.
I have a personal view of what healing is all about. I think that healing takes place when people discover what I want to call their non-local nature, the infinite quality of their consciousness, the capacity of their consciousness to exist infinitely in space and time. The realization that that part of who they are is eternal and immortal, is not born, couldn't die if it tried, and does not sign off with the death of the brain and body. It seems to me that this is the realization that has the most healing punch, if you will, for anyone.
As a result of dialogue among Western, Eastern, and Indigenous practitioners, we're witnessing the emergence of a globally informed medicine that may radically reshape the practice of healing throughout the world. We in the North and West are discovering that we have as much to gain from these ancient systems as their practitioners do from our technology-based approaches.
Well, of course, in Western medicine, we use a lot of machinery for diagnosis and a lot of instruments for diagnosis. It's remarkable for me to see the Chinese practitioners at work with their pulse diagnosis, simply feeling the pulse, and coming up with extremely complex diagnoses on the basis of pulse reading. Also, in Ayurvedic medicine, it's remarkable how much they depend upon smell and taste in terms of smelling the sweat, sometimes even the urine and the feces of the patient. And also, examining parts of the body that Western doctors don't know too much about, like looking at the eyes carefully or looking at the color of the tongue. So there's a number of approaches to diagnosis that I find quite interesting, and it seems to me that all of this could be researched for verticality, for veracity, quite easily.
And when I first encountered Chinese medicine, I have to say my mind was blown. When I learned about energy and that the body was not seen as separate from the environment, and that it had rivers flowing through it and not just blood, but energy, and that these could be influenced in ways. And my fairly superficial understanding of Chinese medicine was sufficient to increase my awe of the human body and to help me stay humble when I offer my offerings to my patients.
I think that in our case, where I live, the Navajo Nation, there are some attempts of integration now. And there's most of the IHS hospitals are building a hogan either within the structure or just outside. And they're allowing families and ceremonial practitioners to come in and work with patients. And I think when a patient is in there for a specific thing, which is the small picture, and then a practitioner comes in and works with them on the whole aspect, the whole healing, I think then you're addressing, the social, the actually economical, the spiritual, all aspects, and then, a real healing can take place. So there is more and more effort. And the IHS physicians are attempting to learn something about the culture. I think there's a feeling of respect.
My goal has always been to try to be a member of a team that's caring for the child. And so in the case of families who use traditional methods, herbalists or just various traditional curanderistic techniques, I just love that, and I incorporate it, and I'm trying to learn more and more about what they're doing for their child. One, so that I know if it's going to conflict with anything that I'm going to then subsequently offer, but two, it helps me understand more how they think about their child's health and how they are incorporating that into their rearing.
Indigenous traditions can be a rich resource for understanding approaches that seek to heal all aspects of a person's being. These include their body, mind, and spirit, and their social and physical context. As researchers explore these traditions, they're impressed by the crucial roles that human intention and ritual appear to play in facilitating healing. We asked Dr. Sylver Quevedo, a Harvard-trained physician, about his extensive first-hand experience with indigenous medicine.
Native American healers, both in North America and South America, but not only Native American healers, but particularly Native American healers, regard medicine as not only a life path, in fact that's the meaning of the word, but also a ceremonial act. So the ritual behaviors and the ceremony associated with healing is a very important element. This is a way that intentions are clarified, that a collective field of intention is created, and that people are brought together. If we think of ceremonial medicine in terms of what we know about the importance of intentionality, not only in sort of philosophy and linguistics, where we know that intention and language are performative, that they have effects, they're sort of speech acts, but also in terms of cognitive psychology, where we know that intention and language are constructive, they create realities. But even more than that, in terms of neurobiology, where we know that cognitive activities often have downward causal effects, and that is, they affect physiology. If we take all of those elements that we know from Western science about the importance of intentionality, and we look at traditional healing through that lens, what we find is that traditional healers are brilliant in that they consciously create an altered state of experience through the use of ritual and ceremony, and usually sound.
And in the Navajo ceremonial system, you will find there are 4 days after the major ceremonies where you are in reverence, and you're still in ceremony, but maybe it's better to say in reverence with the holy people. And there's a whole prescription of do's and don'ts that you follow during that time. And when that's over, you are healed. And you don't question it, and you don't go out and talk about it, and you don't dissect it and say this was the component of my healing. That's where the research would get very tricky. It just doesn't happen. It's a whole, you've been healed in accordance with the natural forces. You believe you've been healed. You go on like you're healed. You are healed, and you don't talk about it.
Healing is basically about change, and if you're not going to change, you're not going to heal. And the change is often not incremental, it's transformative, it's qualitative, it's big, and it's often chaotic, and it's often in areas that you expect will never change in your life. And people who have major illness will tell you that was, the first thing that hit them in the face, that things are not going to be the same. And then it's transcendence in the sense that, there is this kind of awareness that there is some process very much larger than you can handle or even than you've ever been a part of that's happening to you. So there is this spiritual crisis that's inevitably a part of healing.
A major benefit of our dialogue with healers from many traditions is that we're now able to more fully map out some of the common factors that promote healing across all cultures. Dr. Krippner has been at the center of these discussions. He describes a set of principles that can help us assess the potential value of emerging healing systems.
I think that there are basic principles of healing that one finds cross-culturally, and the psychiatrist Fuller Torrey said it much better than I did in his books and writings on the topic. First, healing is more likely if there is a shared worldview. If the healer and the client or patient have the same cultural mythology, the same paradigm under which they're operating. Secondly, healing is more likely to occur if the client or the patient or the healee has some sort of respect or favorable impression of the healer or therapist or doctor or whatever. And third, healing is more likely to occur if there are effective practices, if the herbs or the drugs are good, if the type of psychotherapy is validated and reasonable. In other words, if there is something around that will empower the patient physically or spiritually or intellectually or emotionally or all the possible ways. And fourth, there is the question of rapport, how well the healer and the healee get on together, how well they can interact.
In recent years, we've had the good fortune at the Institute of Noetic Sciences to interview top researchers and healers from diverse traditions. Running through these discussions, we've caught glimpses of a new healing model taking shape. This new model rises above the current antagonism between allopathic and alternative medicine and resists the temptation to simply stick the two systems under one roof and hope for the best. The name of this new model? Integral medicine.
I think that this is, shall we say, a vision that has yet to be actualized. If we ever get to the point where we have integral medicine, then there will not be an alternative branch, there will not be a complementary branch. It will be the same ball game. And we will know much more about how to individualize treatment for any given patient.
I think one very important distinction to be made between what you could call an integral model and what people are calling integrative medicine is integrative medicine in many ways has emerged, I think, evolved into a notion of basically a combining of complementary alternative approaches or non-biomedical approaches with biomedicine, and that then becomes the integration of these different healing modalities, when really an integral approach is one that recognizes the complex sort of multi-dimensional aspects of human beings, that humans are physical creatures and mental, emotional creatures and spiritual creatures as well, and that an integral medicine is one that recognizes that, and that those different dimensions of the human being interact with one another to give rise to well-being or the lack of well-being. Both biomedical approaches, traditional biomedical approaches, and many CAM approaches can actually be practiced in ways that are very non-integral. So, for example, someone has depression, and you could say that they were taking some herb like St. John's wort, which would be like a CAM approach. Well, there's nothing necessarily integral about that at all. It's actually could be seen as essentially as reductionistic an approach as treating them with Prozac.
In response to the growing interest in integral medicine, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has pulled together a collection of remarkable essays titled Consciousness and Healing. In the foreword to the book, Ken Wilber suggests that the integral model's most profound effect may not be on the contents of the integral medicine bag itself, with its blend of conventional pills, orthodox surgery, subtle energy medicine, and acupuncture needles. Its greatest effect may be the transformation of the holders of that bag, the integrally informed health practitioners who are opening themselves up to the entire spectrum of consciousness, from matter to body to mind to soul to spirit. The result of this new awareness is the development of healing practices that expand from physically based interventions to a sacred caring for human beings in all our extraordinary richness.
Medicine will only become a whole person medicine to the degree that physicians really embrace the fact that they're whole human beings themselves. And that requires attention to their whole person. And really, it's not a far leap to imagine that if you're keenly aware of your own interior life, let's say, the things that bring deep meaning and purpose to you, and you're sort of actively engaged in inquiring into that and looking into that and exploring that and how that affects your own well-being, that you would be that much more inclined to actually attend to that in the patients who are coming to see you. You would sort of, it wouldn't be even a question of applying a technique. It would simply be the way that you're looking at life. You would be seeing life from that perspective because you would be living that in your own life.
do not know what integral medicine will look like, but I have some sense of what it would feel like. And that is that when one enters a room where the patient is, that in that moment we experience love for our patient. And love is not some sentiment, as I'm using it. It is experiencing a heartfelt, almost primal need for the well-being of the person in the room.
This is a program that has always been described as non-attachment by the great wisdom traditions. So this really is an issue of going beyond the ego, putting self aside, and getting into a space wherein one is willing to appeal to a higher universal wisdom than one's own.
I realized I was trying to be the perfect doctor. I was trying to not show emotions. I was trying to pretend like everything was under control. What I'm learning now is that as I gently start letting people honestly see how I feel about a situation, they don't completely crumble and they don't lose respect for me. In fact, it seems like maybe I'm gaining a little more respect when I let my true emotions be known about something. So this is new. This is not something I've been doing for a long time, but it's certainly showing a payoff. So it's something I think that I wish somebody had told me when I was in medical school or when I was a resident, that there's a different way that it could be done, a much healthier way.
So what I love about pediatrics, and especially with taking care of children who are really sick, is this opportunity for myself to be fully embodied and in the embodied place, fully care for people and allow them to experience the breadth of their humanity, the breadth of their experience, to feel, to be scared, to worry, to have hope, to be angry, to grieve. So that's
Proponents of integral medicine strongly believe that we should reverse the current trend, where physicians are trained to remain emotionally disconnected from their patients. The integral approach encourages practitioners to show compassion for their patients' emotional, existential, and spiritual struggles, even assisting them in wrestling with the ultimate question of physical death.
So you can pretty much predict that a human being who may not feel comfortable to begin with physically understand something is going on with their heart, so emotions that go along with those physical feelings are uncomfortable. You're anxious, scared. And one thing about the heart business is that it's not a dermatology clinic. It is your life. It is a life and death kind of organ. So in addition to the physical distress and the emotional distress, any unresolved angst about the mortality of the flesh also becomes part of the spiritual domain of the picture. So when you do this 8 times a day, every day, it is in fact a human laboratory of predictable, progressive stress to mind, body, and spirit.
Because it is important from the Western point of view to feel that the healer shares his or her suffering in some way or another. And that's what compassion is all about. It's a cliche to say, I feel your pain, but that's a nice expression of compassion. The healer cannot pity the patient or the client. The healer must feel the pain in some sense, must be compassionate, must be caring, and that openness, I think, is a curative agent in and of itself.
If I sort of go along the way of the kind of the model that's been presented to me, which is to be detached, to not really be in my heart or body, but just kind of to be in here, then I protect myself, supposedly, for a while. But the people that I'm supposed to be caring for never feel like they're really being cared for, And there's no invitation for grief to be expressed, for fear, for hope, for anger, for all the emotions that are part of the human experience.
I think one just has to look to our culture to see where that sense of, keeping the emotions in, keeping your professional exterior, being in control. I mean, I think as a physician, it certainly comes in handy to be in control. I can put on that mask as well as anyone when I'm in an emergency and I need things to happen now and I need this to happen and that. I can do that with the best of them. But I think what happened is nobody then showed us how you can then modify that and bring it into a softer way of being with patients.
Medicine's too objective, too distant, and that's what the distress in patients is. This distance from the personal. They're seeking the personal in the doctor, and they're finding only a doctor, a scientist.
I believe that the fear of death and annihilation is the cause of most suffering for human beings throughout human history, and dwarfs the suffering that's been caused by physical disease. To overcome that kind of suffering is to achieve something magnificent. This, in my judgment, is what healing is all about. Helping people get to that non-local realization that they are immortal and eternal to begin with. That's part of their endowment as human beings.
Because the integral model equally values first, second, and third-person dimensions, it's open to a broad range of healing modalities, some of which are rooted in noetic ways of knowing and being. These include capacities such as intuition, empathy, compassion, and even local and non-local prayer in treatment and diagnosis. Because the integral model respects third-person dimensions, it supports scientific research into the healing potential of human noetic capacities.
We have studied patients with coronary artery disease who are heading for a cath lab. And what we've looked at in these patients are a range of noetic interventions. And noetic to us is the realm where there's not a tangible pill or device, or in fact frequently it's not clear what it is, what the compassion or the love or the spirit or the energy or the chi or the, but noetic to us is a wonderful term as an umbrella to exactly those areas, to some sort of vital human link or interaction that may be a perfect adjunct for the realm of all our most advanced technologies.
Intuition is knowledge that is gained through unconscious and non-rational, non-logical procedures. In other words, it's based on hunches. It's based on subliminal perceptions. It's based on feeling and emotion. It can be wrong, it can be right, but it happens. Some intuition is absolutely on target.
And intuition is a receptive process of being receptive to what's alive in the person in front of me, what's alive in me, and then what comes from that. And that receptivity requires moments of non-thinking.
If you don't have spiritual sophistication as a healer, you can't go there with the patient. You can't go there because you don't have anything really to give. In most other healing traditions around the world, with the exception of Western medicine, which is the only secular tradition, almost all other healing traditions are tied to religious practices. It's not so much the doctrine, but the practices. And this is where things like gratitude and forgiveness and loving kindness come in. So it's the practices of those things are associated with good healers and traditions of healing, except for Western medicine, where it's sort of done as an afterthought. It's not considered intrinsic to the practice of medicine.
At the top of this program, we spoke about a remarkable group of pioneers who are developing promising approaches to the practice of healing, week by week, day by day, and even 60 seconds at a time. We've been fortunate to share a few of their voices with you in this program. The story they tell is of the emergence of a new healing model, and a new model for the 21st century healer, a healer informed by both scientific and noetic ways of knowing, a healer who brings his or her entire being into the healing process, and, in so doing, seeks not only to cure a patient's symptoms, but to bring healing to their entire being. We hope that, like us, you've been encouraged by these remarkable voices. It seems only fitting that they should have the final word.
Out of this difficulty, there is this opportunity for providing care in ways we haven't thought of before, and involving practitioners we haven't thought of before, and involving our patients in ways we haven't thought of before.
All good healers, in my experience, the ones that are good, they have certain qualities. They're kind people. They're happy people, so they can practice loving kindness without a lot of effort. They have reverence when it comes to the work. They have a kind of humility about them, in the sense that they know that they're part of this larger cosmos. They don't sort of believe they know. They're part of it.
One of the things I'm passionate about, and I hope to be part of, is this movement of teaching medical students, teaching physicians, teaching people in medicine how to embody more fully the healing presence. Because I think that is probably the fundamental quality that's going to really shift medicine from a really fragmented exercise to a truly holistic enterprise.
And I'm confident that our best minds, our most compassionate healers are going to come forward, and we're going to construct out of this mess something that's rather majestic. So I think it's a hopeful time to be alive and working in this business.
The Institute of Noetic Sciences, founded in 1973 by Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, investigates consciousness, mind, and spirit, and the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. Through frontier sciences, transformative education, and learning communities, our programs and inquiries are guided by our vision of global wisdom for the 21st century. Since the founding of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, we've been addressing some of the most fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? What is our place in the universe? And if, in fact, consciousness can change the physical world, what are the implications of this as we try to create a more just, compassionate, and sustainable future?